Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of the Peace Podcast. This one is Just Give Me My Desires, whatever that looks like. And so I landed on this one because I was thinking about how oftentimes, especially in dating, so that's the main example that I'm going to use. We try to change our desires, change our preferences, change our taste for something just to have the thing. And then at the end, we wonder, why isn't this what I thought it was going to be? And we realize that we have this desire. The desire didn't go away just because we placed somebody in that spot. And then we become really frustrated with the situation when in fact we knew that that was going to be an issue all along. And so when I think about this, when I think about in my one of my previous relationships that ended up being a pretty toxic one, the when I first started dating the person, like I had this feeling that it was a no. Um, Ended up dating them for almost 8 years, but had a feeling that it was a no. And then something that really struck me in the very beginning was that this person was a pretty extreme partier. So, day parties on the weekends and, drinking and, all of these things. And I convinced myself over the course of months that that person was just having fun. And though those may be ways that people do have fun, in the realm of that world, there was a lot of flirtation with other women and a lot of just things that don't really work in the confines of a relationship or in a healthy relationship. And I knew those things existed, but I told myself, don't be a prude, just, go with it, go with the flow. He's younger than you, that type of thing. And I made excuses for it. And in the duration of our relationship, infidelity and getting attention from other women became one of the large concerns of our relationship, and ultimately one of the major reasons why I wanted to leave. And so I tried to change my feeling toward the thing inside of the relationship in order to have the person. And it doesn't work. It's never going to work. And it just develops resentment and frustration. So let's talk about settling, why we settle, how we're settling, and some things we do inside of settling. So in the initial part of this, we need to determine what are your preferences and what are your tastes anyway, because sometimes we just get that feeling in the pit of our stomach and we don't really know what our tastes or preferences even are. We just know that something doesn't land well with us or doesn't seem right. But your taste will align with your purpose. So what you want and desire will align with what your life's purpose and plan is. And if you go for something that isn't within your realm of desire, then it's not going to fit into your world when you're pursuing your purpose or your destiny. In fact, it may just be the thing that holds you back from that thing. And I think oftentimes we wait until we get to the decision part, till we get to the, oh, this person can't come with me part, till we get to the, oh, this is my purpose and I don't think this person aligns with it part. But if we sit with ourselves and really resonate with what do we like? What are our preferences? What are our desires? What are our tastes? And really delve into those and let them permeate our being so that when we walk into the world and we see something that's different from that, we know immediately. And so I was having this conversation the other day, and this fantastic analogy was brought to my attention in that conversation. And so I thought I have to share that on the pod because it is so good. And it aligns specifically with the settling portion of this, which is what I wanted to talk about today. So one of the things that we talked about was if you really like Dr. Pepper, and I'm going to use that as the basis of what our taste is, right? So Dr. Pepper is going to be our taste and our preference and our desire in this analogy. So if you really like Dr. Pepper and you go into a restaurant and the restaurant doesn't serve Dr. Pepper, you might order a Coke or a Pepsi or something else to replace that soda that you wanted because it's still soda. But you're going to drink it and you're going to be okay with just having the Coke for now, but you're still going to have that taste and desire for the Dr. Pepper. Having the Coke in its place isn't going to change the taste that you have and the desire that you have to order that Dr. Pepper. Just because it isn't available in the restaurant doesn't mean that your taste for that thing will change. And so if we equate that portion of the analogy to just our regular everyday lives, you think about how oftentimes when we just want a partner, right? Just like we just wanted a soda, when we just want a partner, if the Dr. Pepper version, the thing that really aligns with who we are and really aligns with our preferences and really aligns with what we know is our destiny going forward, if that isn't available, then oftentimes we'll go for maybe our second best or something that we know isn't specifically aligned, but perhaps it could be a little bit aligned. So we'll go for that second option just because it's someone to fill the space. And we think that if we change our tastes a little bit, that we'll get whatever the thing is that we want. And in this case, let's say it's a life partner. I'm going to change my taste to get the life partner. And we think that that's going to satiate our desire. But it doesn't, because if you put Coca-Cola in the place of Dr. Pepper, though it's still soda, it's still missing something. Because what you really wanted was that, I guess it's like a cherry flavor. I don't really drink Dr. Pepper, but you really wanted that cherry flavor that's in the Dr. Pepper. And the Coca-Cola really just isn't that. Now, maybe it will suffice for your soda craving, but eventually you're going to still want the Dr. Pepper, even though you've had the Coke. And that's how it's going to work when we put people in our lives. If you change your taste to fit having that person in the space, eventually, maybe initially it'll work, but eventually you're going to yearn for the thing and the person and whatever's in front of you to satiate what it is that you actually want. And so you can't change your tastes just to get what you want, because your tastes are your desires. And when those desires are met, they align specifically with your purpose and your destiny moving forward. The other part of this analogy is, if you were to go into that same restaurant and let's say there were 2 or 3 or 4 sodas on the table and they didn't have labels on them, right? Like nothing told you what type of soda they were. It wouldn't matter whether the label was there or not. If you tasted every single one of those sodas, you're going to know, based on what you prefer, like, and have a desire for, which one of those is the Dr. Pepper, because that is your preference, that is your taste, that is your desire. It doesn't have to have a label in order for you to know what your taste is. But sometimes in our lives, we create the labels for people who really aren't it for us, right? So we'll create a label for a person and be like, okay, I'm going to make this person my partner. We'll create a label for a person and say, okay, this person can be my wife or my husband. And the label is created to fill the space. But if the label wasn't there, would that person satiate you? Would that person make you feel satisfied? Would that person make you feel like God specifically handed them to you? And the answer is probably no. Because if you went through those glasses and you just started putting labels on them based on what you hoped they were, eventually you're going to taste the Dr. Pepper and go back and be like, oh, no, that one wasn't the Dr. Pepper. This one's the Dr. Pepper because I've tasted all of them now. And so when you create that label for someone who isn't it, you're going to notice. You're going to notice if it's not the right thing for you. You're going to notice if it's missing something. And it's not going to matter whether there's a label or not, because you know what your tastes and preferences are. And on the other end of that, if you were to go to that same restaurant and they were to have put labels on the sodas and you were to taste them based on what their labels were, you would notice if the labels were inaccurate. But in our lives, people will label themselves as trustworthy when they're really not. They'll label themselves as wifey material when they're really not bringing that to the table, or they're not living that life. They'll label themselves as spiritual or Christian or all of these things, but their lives aren't showing that they're actually living that life. And so oftentimes we trust and believe those labels and allow ourselves to get tricked by the labels because someone is representing or presenting themselves as that, even though they're bringing their representative to the table. And so just like if you were to drink that Coke, even if it's labeled Dr. Pepper, you're going to be able to tell, well, that's not really Dr. Pepper, because you know your preferences, you know your tastes, and you know what's really going to fill you. So when we walk into the world and we're tricked by people's labels, we can't even be frustrated because we're allowing them to give us a representative without actually inspecting it. So if you didn't go through the dating and the courting process to really see if this person fulfills all the desires of your heart, you just said, oh, okay, it's a female or it's a male or whatever, and I'm going to put them in this space because I need to not be lonely, without going through that process, then you can't be upset when you're tricked by what they represented themselves as, when what's actually in them is no parts of that, right? So if you quickly go to grab the glass that has the label of Dr. Pepper without actually tasting it, you can't be frustrated when you get back to your seat and you drink it and it's really Coca-Cola. Yes, it's false advertising, but that happens every day. People falsely advertise themselves as something that they're not every single day. And, when I got into one of my relationships, I remember him telling me, he was the spiritual person, and that, yes, he had some hurt based on previous religious instances, etc. But when it really came down to it, he wasn't any of those things. He didn't pray. He certainly didn't go to church. He did not read his Bible. He could recite it to you because of the religious background that he had, but he certainly didn't read the scripture as it pertained to his life. We only went to church one time together in our entire relationship. In fact, when we went on a trip one time, he started to tell me all of the things that he didn't like about religion, and all of the things he actually believed about science and all of this. And so what I learned was that the way he presented himself, he even brought scripture to the first date. I think I told you guys this too. And what I realized is that when he did all of that, it was in an effort for him to present himself as what he thought I wanted, as opposed to presenting himself as who he was. And I think that truly was because he knew that if he would present himself as who he actually was, that I wouldn't have been for it, that I wouldn't have been in that relationship. And so what happens when we let those desires dwindle down and we go for the person in front of us instead of really paying attention to what satiates us, what we have a desire for, what we have a longing and a love for? And what happens is we settle. So we settle just to make sure someone is in that spot. We settle just to make sure that we aren't alone. We settle just to make sure that we are not looked at in the world as somebody who's broken, right? Somebody who is, what do they say? Like damaged goods, right? Like if you're over a certain age, you're damaged goods. So we find someone and we settle just for the sake of not having to experience that. And really what we end up finding is we become miserable in the end, because we get to this portion of the relationship where we're like, this isn't anything that I actually wanted. And for the sake of not being lonely or not being viewed a certain way, I've gotten myself into this situation and gotten with this person and put myself in this relationship in an effort to make sure that I've fulfilled that desire, which is to have somebody in space. But now I'm noticing that I'm settling because I have these desires that I've suppressed and pushed down because I wanted, for the sake of having somebody in that title. And now what I know that I actually need to be fulfilled and to be joyful in my life isn't happening, because those desires are bubbling back up to the surface, and I'm realizing that they're not going to get met by this thing. So we'll walk into the future wondering, if we stay in that relationship, wondering what it would have been like to actually have the desires of our heart. Or we'll walk into the future knowing that this relationship is never going to make us happy and having to discard that relationship because it just isn't ever going to be what we need or want. If you're in a relationship that really isn't fulfilling the desires of your heart, I really hope that you do the latter rather than the former. I've seen people who've stayed in relationships for a really long time, hoping that something will shift or change in them. And what ends up happening is not only do they resent the person, but they resent themselves for staying so long, for wasting time in this situation when they knew that it was never going to fulfill them and bring them the joy that they know that they could have if they would have just gone for the person or waited for the person who actually aligned with their purpose. Listen, your tastes and desires aren't accidental. It's the same reason why one person will prefer this type of a person over another person who prefers this type of a person, right? I prefer somebody who's funny. Other people might think that man is corny, right? So like, we have those preferences for a reason, and the reason is so that we will specifically be attracted to the person who aligns with our purpose and our destiny. And if you aren't in tune with those things, you're never going to know what your taste or preference actually is. Or if you're going for somebody to just fill the space, then you're always going to be void of what you actually want. You're going to perpetually be drinking the Coke when you really just want the Dr. Pepper. And so if you're one of those people today, I encourage you to really sit with what are your tastes and what are your preferences, to really determine if the person in front of you is aligning with those tastes and preferences and your vision and purpose for the future, your destiny. And if you're settling, really sit with yourself and determine if, you believed a label that was presented to you and you were tricked by it, or if you created a label for that person just to get them to fill the space. But certainly do not try to change the desires of your heart, try to change your tastes or preferences in an effort to make sure that you have somebody in that spot, because every single time you're going to be settling. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, you can find me on my website, carrienicole.com, on all social media sites. And if you haven't already, pick up your copy of Poems to Heal the Dead Things. If you know somebody who's healing from a toxic relationship or is going through one and is trying to find a way to leave, this book would be a great gift for the holidays. So go ahead and click on that link and purchase your copy. If it's you, go ahead and click on that link and purchase the copy. You can also direct message me so that we can talk about how you can navigate through that journey. I appreciate you all, and I thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.